mom told me not to drive back that night, but I had an exam early the next day. The trip from the countryside to the city would take me a few hours, but I was determined to go as I had studied a lot during the weekend. It made more sense to leave in the evening as the snowstorm was only supposed to start during the night. The road conditions were going to be terrible in the morning and I didn't want to risk not making it for the exam. So off I went. I must have been driving for about half an hour when my car started making these weird sounds. I had an old car and I was used to hearing some rowdy engine noises once in a while. I would usually just crank up the radio volume to bury the noise. But about 15 minutes later, the car gradually started slowing down on its own until the lights turned off and the car broke down on the side of the road. It was a really cold night. I tried restarting the car, but nothing happened. The car battery had died. I couldn't even use the AC to heat myself up. My phone was also dead. I felt sunken from all the misfortunes. I was totally stranded in the middle of freezing nowhere with no sign of civilization nearby. Only a thick, dark forest and an ever-approaching snowstorm. I waited for a bit, hoping someone would pass by, but no one did. I took a moment to weigh all my options and concluded that I couldn't just stay and freeze inside the car. So I got out the car and started walking. I knew there was a small cabin further down the road as I've driven here many times before, but I couldn't locate exactly where I was due to the darkness. I made my way looking for any signs of life in the faint moonlight. After walking for 10 minutes, I saw a stream of smoke, possibly from a chimney. I let out a happy gasp and felt a huge energy of hope. Thank God, I kept repeating as I made my way towards the source of smoke in the narrow side trail. I finally got to the front porch and looked around. There were no signs of human presence other than the smoking chimney and a nightlight inside. However, I did notice some fresh footprints on the ground leading towards a small trail behind the cabin. I knocked on the door 3 times and waited, but no one answered. It was extremely cold and I couldn't stand it. I decided to open the door and ask if anyone was home since the door was unlocked. Again, no answer. The only thing I had in mind at that time was to call my parents. I wandered inside and found a cordless phone near the couch. I called my parents and told them about my car breaking down. They told me they were jumping in their car to come pick me up. Since it would take a while for my parents to get to my car, I decided to warm up a little longer in the cabin rather than go back and freeze my butt off. I had prepared an explanatory script in my head just in case the owner would walk back in before I left. It was while warming up near the fireplace that I detected a nasty smell coming from the basement. The deep, unpleasant smell really piqued my interest, and I decided to go and have a look despite the intrusion. I switched on the light, and what I then saw in the basement was worthy of a horror scene. There were dead bodies of kittens and puppies everywhere with their guts hanging out. Blood had dried up on the ground and their flesh had already started rotting. There were insects and cockroaches all over. I got hit with a sudden feeling of drowsiness and almost threw up. I was not sure what was going on, but I knew I had to get the hell out of there ASAP. I ran back upstairs and rushed to the front door. I opened it and had a look outside to see if there was anyone around. No one was there, but I saw a flashlight through the woods coming back from the bushy trail. I decided to run as fast as I could away from the area and back to the main road. As I scrambled out the cabin, the door shut very loudly behind me. The person in the trail definitely heard it. I kept running away and had a quick peek over my shoulder. I saw the flashlight moving a lot faster than a while ago. I pushed myself even more until I got to the main road and kept running. I finally saw my car from a distance with my parents waiting for me. I told my parents about what I saw and we called the cops right away. It was the next morning that I heard about a man getting arrested at the cabin. Apparently, there was more to what I saw in the basement. My mom ended up bringing me to the city super early the next morning. Despite the lack of sleep, I was able to pass my exam with no problem. The only issue I was left with was the traumatizing images from the horror scene inside my head. It happened when I was 12 years old. School had just ended and I was playing with my two friends, Jake and Mandy. We were supposed to walk home, but there was an alert of a snowstorm approaching, so our parents were going to pick us up and they were going to be running late because of the road conditions. We were playing hide and seek, and Mandy and I went outside the school compound to hide. We hid in similar spots and waited for Jake to go far enough so we could creep up and scare him. A few minutes passed and we peeped out to see if he was looking for us. There was no sign of him. That felt weird. We looked at each other, but I could see Mandy was thinking that Jake was messing with us. After another few minutes, we got out of our hiding place and started looking for him. I was starting to get nervous. I called his name and the only thing calling back was the thick wind. I started sensing anxiety in Mandy's voice. We started looking for Jake everywhere. I was scared. I was even about to cry. There seemed to be no one around and the school staff had already left. It was getting dark. Upon searching, I saw a man sitting at one of the wooden lunch tables under the school marquee. As I approached the man, I got to see his face, an old man with many wrinkles. He noticed that I was approaching him and welcomed me with a warm smile. But he quickly looked concerned when he saw my nervous face. I asked him if he saw a boy my age and told him me and Mandy had lost our friend. He asked,
"Who is Mandy?"
I turned around and Mandy wasn't there. My heart sank. I started stuttering. I felt like crying again. I was all alone. The old man quickly said we would go look for them and that he might have seen some kids run towards the backside of the school. Remember, I was 12 and quite naive. By this time, the snow had been getting aggressive. I was getting cold and out of breath. The old man noticed and gave me his jacket. It was too big for me, but it was just what I needed. As I was hugging the jacket to myself, I noticed something hard poking on my side. There was something in one of the pockets. I thought I'd take it out so it wouldn't be poking me. Once I took it out, I looked at the object and stopped in my tracks. It was Jake's bracelet. He never leaves it behind. I couldn't figure out how it got into this old man's jacket. He looked back at me and asked if everything was all right, but he caught me staring at the bracelet. Everything paused. It was at that moment I understood what was happening. He quickly grunted and furiously made his way back to me. I screamed and ran the other way. I struggled to get away in the thick snow. The man was a lot bigger than me. My vision blurred. I could hear my own heartbeat. It was so silent, not even the wind made noise this time. Before I could turn my head to the incoming loud roar, I felt a jolt of pain on the back of my head, and I came crashing down. I couldn't see, I couldn't hear, I was knocked unconscious. I woke up probably a minute later to my body being carried by this man on his shoulder, walking through the snow. I looked around and screamed for help. No answer. The man held me tighter to his shoulder when he realized I had woken up. I tried punching the old man in the face and kept kicking him with my snow boots while screaming as loud as I could. The man held me really tight and I was struggling to move my hands and legs. I kept trying to punch his face until I was able to poke his left eyeball with my fingers. He let out a sharp scream and lost grip of me. I fell to the ground but got up right away and ran as fast as I could. After a bit, I looked over my shoulder and the man had stayed where he was, leaning forward in pain, holding his face. I kept running until I reached the nearest corner store. I told the clerk about what happened and to call 911. I stayed inside the corner store until the cops and my mom got there before I went back home. Jake and Mandy were found later that night in a locked and abandoned car a few miles away from school. Luckily, they didn't suffer from any physical harm other than frostbite. 2 old men were later arrested and put behind bars for the kidnapping. It turned out these two men had previous criminal history for child abuse. This happened last winter. I didn't have my license despite being old enough to drive. My best friend invited me to hang out, but our parents were already asleep, and we didn't have a way of transport. We lived about 3 miles apart, so it wasn't uncommon for us to meet up halfway at the neighborhood park. The park had a big hill where we'd slide down with our sleds. It was already 10 p.m., so we had the intention to slide for about an hour before returning back home. About a mile into my walk along the main road, a black car pulled into the driveway of a home I was passing by. The thing was, he wasn't entirely into the driveway. He was almost halfway hanging out in the road. I kind of assumed that the guy wanted to give me a ride, but I didn't just take rides from anyone. I kept walking and went around the car, ignoring it. I expected the driver to roll down the window and shout at me, but it didn't happen. The car just sat running on the edge of the driveway. The windows were tinted and it was pitch dark inside to the point where I could barely make out the figure of a large man. I don't typically get frightened by anything, but there was something in the air that made me tense up. I stopped and turned to look at the car again because I had a feeling that the person driving was watching me or had bad intentions. The figure in the car was definitely looking at me. I could see the reflection from his dash bouncing off his eyes. I timidly waved at the man, letting him know that I saw him, but he just kept staring at me. I continued to pace away, but slightly quicker this time. After a few moments, I heard the car slowly roll in reverse, so I turned to have a look, but I kept pacing backwards. The car kept creeping, slowly. I pulled down my coat hood and stood still again, waiting for him to pass me. But instead, the man slowed down and stopped right beside me. The passenger side window rolled down, and the man and I met eyes. He stared at me for about 5 seconds, not saying a single word. I swear that was the creepiest thing I've ever seen. Before I could even say hello, the man frowned while shaking his head, and then accelerated quickly, almost as if he was in displeasure or disappointed by what he had seen. I continued to walk towards the park and finally met my friend. I told him about the encounter and we decided that we'd walk back together at his place after we'd be done sliding just in case. To this day, I still believe that the only reason I was not kidnapped that night was because I was not the person who the man was looking for. Do you have a true, scary story to share? Send your 500 to 600 word horror story to goosebumpsterofficial@gmail.com. Please make sure you have well-structured sentences and grammar. Also, let us know how you would like your name to be credited in the video. Terrorize the like button and subscribe to the channel if you dare.
I'll see you soon.